Recording. Okay, I think it's recording now.
Yep.
So I'll just first start by saying thank you so much for your time, Dr. Owusu Bempah. We appreciate you sharing your time with us to answer a couple of questions. We aim for these answers to be included in our cannabis and mental health course in order to support the education and wellness of youth. So know that your work, which has already been so impactful, is going to be making a difference. So the first question is, we know that the criminalization of cannabis was made on racist grounds and not much evidence at all. What is the legacy of this criminalization today?
The legacy today is the continued targeting, criminalization, and marginalization of, in the Canadian context, largely Black and Indigenous people. And it had been up until legalization and still afterwards, Black and Indigenous youth for cannabis-related offenses. So with respect to cannabis in the law, the most common type of offense for which people are arrested, charged with respect to cannabis is typically possession. It's something that is relatively common amongst the Canadian population and among Canadian youth. And we know that Black and Indigenous people generally, we have actually less data on youth, although I have some coming in now, but Black and Indigenous people in this country have been disproportionately stopped and searched and ultimately arrested and charged for cannabis related offenses and cannabis possession in particular. So we can go, like, there are lots of ways we can go here. So let's have some fun with this. What kind of stuff do you want to talk about? Like, I can talk about how disproportionate police stop and search practices influence this. We can talk about what the consequences are. Why don't you give me a sense of the question so I know how far to kind of go with any one?
Yeah, sure. I guess as a follow-up, because this is something that's being viewed by youth, like, are there impacts of this that are specifically pressing for youth, and how would youth learn to navigate these structures, of course, while we're working to dismantle them?
Okay. And is that like, so we've got this purport. So, because I can talk about like what the impact of a criminal record is, and then how that disproportionately affects young people, and then the types of things young people can think about in their context. Like, this is a harm reduction approach, right? And so I'm not going to tell young people not to use cannabis. I tell them like how to do it in a more sensible manner with respect to the law, right? So in terms of like when you can do it in private spaces, ensuring that you've got cannabis license, it, like, the tick sticker on the, so should we go into some of that stuff?
That would be really great, actually.
Okay, so I'll just ramble and then you use what you want.
So the disproportionate impact, I think, as a preface, which is similar to what you just stated, and maybe some data that you have on that, and then going into that pressing impact on youth and how they can work around that. Perfect. That language isn't correct, but yeah,
so let me just, I'm just going to ramble and then just rein me in as you need to, okay? So in Canada, we know that Black and Indigenous people specifically, and to an extent, South Asian and Asian populations, depending on where you are in the country, are disproportionately stopped, searched, documented by the police, stopped and questioned. And in the course of these stops and searches, we know inevitably that some young people are going to be found in possession of cannabis. Cannabis is something that young people in Canada have done at relatively high rates in comparison to other parts of the world. And so we may expect that as the police go about stopping and searching people, that they're going to find cannabis on them. Now because of disproportionate police stop and search practices, again, it's Indigenous people and it's Black people largely who've been the targets of police efforts to enforce drug laws and the Canadian war on drugs. We have some research published first by a reporter at Vice News showing quite literally from coast to coast, from Vancouver to Halifax, that Black people and Indigenous people were between 3 and 9 times as likely as white people to be arrested for cannabis possession, even though we know that rates of cannabis use are relatively similar across racial groups. Now, this is hugely problematic, and especially for young people. Getting a criminal record for something like cannabis possession or other cannabis related offenses can impact on your ability to complete school. It may lead to school exclusion or difficulties with your education. It, of course, a criminal record makes it more difficult for you to get a job when employers conduct record checks. It can make it increasingly difficult to get housing because some private landlords are conducting criminal records checks as well. And then, of course, it can make it difficult to travel. Many countries, including the United States, will not allow people with criminal records and drug-related criminal records to enter into their countries. So life becomes much more difficult from something as seemingly simple as a minor cannabis possession offense. So I think it's important for young people in thinking about their cannabis use and harm reduction, think about harm reduction, not only in the context of their mental and physical health, which are of course important, but also in terms of one's social health, which impact upon physical and mental health. Again, the criminal record that someone has makes their lives more difficult and impinges upon or hampers many of their life chances. And so I oftentimes, in talking with youth, try to help them think about the context in which they use cannabis, right? Not using in public places where you may be, let me just pause there and kind of articulate what I want to say properly. I try to help young people think about where they use cannabis for starters, right? Decreasing your use in public space where it may be easy for the police to identify and to ultimately catch you in the act of consuming cannabis. To think about the cannabis you possess. Even though cannabis is legal in this country, it is still illegal for young people to possess cannabis if you're under the age requirements, so 18 or 19 years old, depending on the jurisdiction. And so you can still get a ticket for that. If you're caught in possession of what's considered to be illegal cannabis, so that's cannabis that was not purchased from a licensed retailer and grown by a licensed producer, then you're subject to a series of criminal penalties. And you can tell whether or not your cannabis is legal based on whether or not it has an excise tax on it. So I always encourage young people to ensure that their cannabis is packaged in a container that has an excise stamp on it, so that the police, if they were to stop them, know that it is a legal product or it looks like a legal product. And then to think about things like ensuring that they don't drive after consuming cannabis. And again, this is something particularly salient for racialized young people who are, again, disproportionately subject to police stop, search, and question activities. But for all young people, again, this relates not only to your physical health, because driving under the influence of cannabis increases the likelihood of one getting in an accident. But if you're stopped by the police and you're caught driving impaired, this is, again, going to have negative impacts on your life. Even where you store your cannabis in your car, and having open cannabis or open cannabis containers in your car can create a number of different problems. And so I think, it's important when we think about harm reduction and we think about minimizing risks, that we don't think about those only in the context of protecting our physical and our mental health, but also our social well-being. And the potential for criminalization, even after legalization, is great. In fact, there are more laws around the cannabis plant now than there were before legalization. And so that means that there are more ways in which people can get caught up in the criminal justice system for cannabis-related offenses.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Owusu Bempah. I have one final question. So I remember watching one of your presentations where you stated that cannabis was a gateway drug, but not in the way that we have typically or culturally named it that, and that instead it's a gateway to the criminal justice system. I was wondering if you could almost like restate that and then provide some elaboration.
So we've often heard that cannabis is a gateway drug, and by that people have liked to say that it's a gateway to harder drug use. That is, that starting with cannabis is going to lead you to consume more dangerous and potentially harmful drugs. I don't necessarily see it that way. Actually, there's relatively little or no evidence for the gateway consumption theory, but I do see cannabis as a gateway into the criminal justice system for our more I do see cannabis as a gateway into the criminal justice system for our most marginalized populations. And what I mean by that is that cannabis provides an easy reason for a police officer to begin an investigation, and ultimately to, if you're doing something wrong, to arrest you and to bring you into the criminal justice system. So for me, cannabis is a gateway drug, but it's a gateway drug to the justice system as opposed to necessarily harder drug use.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Cool.
Any other questions come to mind, Kia, or are we good?
I'm feeling really good about it. A lot of different ideas were coming up. I guess in terms of like social well-being, you kind of spoke, I'm trying to figure out where my question's going, but could you maybe speak to like what it is to have like a healthy social life, or like have, what am I trying to articulate? Like there's physical well-being, mental well-being, and also like a healthy social well-being. And could you speak to what that may look like?
So in terms of healthy social well-being, I'm thinking about one's ability. I don't need to talk about like one's. When I think about healthy social well-being, or I think about social well-being, I'm thinking about, in large part, your ability to function well in society. And so we know that there are a number of reasons why people are excluded from society. Some of those are, based on who they are and what they look like, unfortunately, but they're also based on other identity markers. And a criminal justice record or criminal record is a key identity marker. So your ability to become, I don't want to sound either paternalistic or how do I articulate this in a way that's correct?
You can take your time to answer.
Yeah, no, I absolutely I will, because this is key too, right? So again, you'll edit this, right? So you can just kind of match what I'm saying together. So your ability to navigate society, I don't want to say become productive members of society, because that's just like so capitalistic talk, right? Exactly.
I know.
But so let me just say again. So when I think about social well-being, I think about your ability to function to the best of your ability within society. And we know that there are a number of reasons why people may be marginalized from our society. Certain identity markers do that. And a criminal record is a key identity marker. You're quite literally labeled a criminal, and you're less able to navigate our society and to immerse yourself into our society, and unfortunately to be successful. And so in talking about social well-being, again, I think about things like one's ability to complete their education, to find meaningful and gainful employment, to secure housing, to volunteer, to travel, all of the things that we would, or many of us would like to do. And it's important to remember that not necessarily, I don't say not your cannabis use, because I got to be careful and like not promote cannabis use. I'm censoring myself too much here. I think it's important to remember that our behaviors and our activities and what we do with cannabis can have a huge impact on our social well-being.
Yeah, I think the way you rephrased that was perfect.
Yeah, please edit carefully. I don't want to seem, again, like paternalistic or blah 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 blah. I'm sure you won't.
We'll send it to you before we move forward with it as well, just to make sure you're comfortable.
Kind of record. I don't know if we had to get the lighting exactly like this because it is so sunny outside. But like, if you guys, if there's anything I didn't say, and I could always even just record myself and flip it over to you both.
Okay. We really appreciate this time that you've spent.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
It's going to change the course because like we have a lot of youth speaking, which is really amazing, but to have like an expert come in, I think it will really add another element to it.
Cool. Totally, and feel free to like mash in if you can, like one of the, like my TEDx or something or whatever it might be, right? Like do what you want with that kind of stuff. But cool. Okay. Again, feel free to reach out if you need anything else. Okay.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Appreciate
it.
it.
Nice to meet you, and nice to see you.
Well.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, Dr. Owusu Bempah.